Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can I just welcome you here to our first time in Collins Barracks for the Policing Authority meeting, and just your attention just for some usual safety announcements. Just take note of the emergency exits, which are the door at the back of the room. And if you require any assistance, there's a number of my colleagues around the room and you can ask them for help. As usual, the event is streamed live, so just be aware of that. And can you all check, including myself, I do this every time, can you check that your mobile phone is switched off because it may affect the streaming feed. Silence from the audience at all times, and as usual, it is an engagement between the authority and the Garda Commissioner, so you're present to observe, although we do have guests here, which Josephine will introduce in a moment, which is a little bit different, but otherwise, thank you very much. Josephine.
Thank you, Helen. Bala Yearva Cordiag Spolcha Arist, Quig Crinu on to the Ross Pauline of the Le Commissioner or the Shirkona. Good afternoon, everybody. And as Helen has said, we're in a new venue today. We also have some guests today, which is in a new format, an unusual format, and I'm going to return to that in a second. Commissioner, you and your colleagues are welcome. I think this may be Superintendent O'Donnell's first occasion at a formal authority meeting.
That's correct.
You're welcome, Tony. I think we've had Alan before.
Once before.
I think we have. So you're welcome. In the course of the authority's work last year, we dealt at some length with issues to do with protests at Uncasson and Tala, and subsequently, not quite related matter, different type of matter, but in the same space of public order in North Frederick Street. And arising from our consideration of that material, we invited the Garda Inspectorate to do a piece of work on our behalf in relation to public order policing. It was the first time we had used that power, and we very much appreciate the fact that the Inspectorate accepted our request and carried out what I consider to be a very focused and readable, accessible piece of work on our behalf. The report was noted by government yesterday and laid before the Oireachtas, and we've invited the Inspectorate to come along today in a slightly unusual departure for the authority, but one that I hope you will find productive and useful for those of you who are looking in at home, to come along and present the headline findings and recommendations of their report. After the Inspectorate has presented, and there may be a clarification question or two, they will then withdraw in the audience to the audience, and then we'll have a conversation with the Commissioner about the findings and recommendations in the report. So let's see if we can make this work. There's some technology available, so the audience should be in a position to see slides that the inspectors will be using to assist their presentation. So Mark, if I may hand it over to you to introduce your work, and thank you.
Very much. Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting us to present the findings from our report on public order policing. As you are aware, the Garda Inspectorate is an independent statutory body with an objective of ensuring that the resources available to the Garda Síochána are used to achieve and maintain the highest levels of efficiency and effectiveness in its operation and administration, as measured by reference to the best standards of comparable police services. The Inspectorate was requested by the Policing Authority to carry out an inspection of the Garda Síochána's policing of public order. I would like to personally thank the members and staff of the Garda Síochána, as well as representatives from other agencies and organisations, for their invaluable contributions towards this report. One of the objectives of policing in Ireland, as set out in the 2005 Garda Síochána Act, is the preservation of peace and public order. Public order policing is an important environment and an arena where human rights are likely to be engaged. In recent years, the Garda Síochána has successfully policed several large-scale public events, such as state visits. From the outset of this inspection, it was evident that Ireland, thankfully, has low numbers of incidents of serious disorder that require the use of public order tactics and the deployment of Gardaí in full public order equipment. However, the impact of disorder on public confidence when it does occur can be significant, and when it happens, the Garda Síochána needs to be able to respond appropriately to planned events that have the potential for disorder, as well as spontaneous incidents that can develop quickly. While the inspection found areas of good practice, such as public order training, it also found a number of areas that requires improvement. This includes the use of a strategic threat and risk assessment, a vital tool used in many other jurisdictions, and its absence is a significant organisational risk. I'm now going to hand over to Deputy Chief Inspector Hugh, who led this inspection, and Hugh will present the key findings and some of the recommendations in our report.
Thank you. Chair, members, Commissioner, thank you for the opportunity to appear here today. As Mark has said, this is a forward-looking examination of the effectiveness of public order policing in Garda Síochána. The final report findings are structured to reflect our terms of reference and contained within 4 chapters that examine specific aspects of Garda Síochána public order policing, namely the Garda Síochána's capacity and capability, strategy, governance and accountability, the effectiveness of operational delivery, post-incident management. The Garda Síochána's focus on human rights and their codes of ethics were examined throughout this inspection, as these were considered vital components that should not be confined to any single aspect. I would now like to go through the key findings and heading recommendations as described by the Chair. In terms of strategy, governance and accountability in Chapter 1. As part of our inspection, we conducted international visits to Northern Ireland and Scotland and examined public order policing in those jurisdictions. Police Scotland and PSNI are both highly regarded within the public order policing context and share many of the challenges experienced in Ireland. Both these services have a detailed understanding of local public order. They understand demands, how many times they are deployed in public order units, and the number of incidents and their locations. They understand ongoing risks such as community tensions, sporting events and international visits, and their organisational readiness, their training, equipment, numbers and any gaps that exist. All this information is contained within a single, regularly reviewed plan known as a Public Order Strategic Threat and Risk Assessment. Whilst we found good examples of local assessment of public order in Garda Síochána, such as in Kilkenny City, at a national level, this risk and planning process is currently absent in the Garda Síochána, and we believe this to be a significant risk. There is no way of ensuring that in Garda Síochána preparedness is strategically aligned with national risks. We recommend the development of a public order strategic threat and risk assessment be introduced urgently. There is no single individual with strategic governance responsibility for public order policing. The Assistant Commissioner, Dublin Metropolitan Region, has responsibility for policy. Regional Assistant Commissioners equip and staff local members, and the Assistant Security and Intelligence and Major Event Planning all have responsibility for specific aspects. As a result, there is limited strategic coordination, which hinders implementation of previous recommendations and improvement of the public order policing function. We found that reviews into the An public order incident and the North Frederick Street had not been actively progressed on a number of areas. We recommend that Assistant Commissioner Roads Policing and Major Event Management should have the lead responsibility for public order policy, governance and compliance. Public order policing and Garda use of force occurrences have the greatest potential to engage human rights and the Code of Ethics. However, related Garda procedures and information are not readily available to the public. We believe that the transparent publication of these policies and data is essential to ensure there is effective public scrutiny and debate. We recommend that all use of force data and public order policies and guidance should be published. Public order policing and Garda use of force requires robust internal governance and external oversight. The effectiveness and proportionality of tactics, training and equipment needs to be closely monitored to ensure the safety and human rights of members of Garda Síochána and the public. Civil claims, Garda Síochána Ombudsman's findings and the Garda internal reports should all inform governance decisions. We recommend an internal governance body to review public order and Garda use of force, and that the policing authority incorporate oversight of Garda use of force into its performance monitoring activities. This is an example of a police service publishing use of force externally on the web page. Not only are the occasions when CS spray or batons used and recorded, but also when a police officer draws their baton or spray with the intention of using it, a report is made and those statistics are available. We believe this is good practice and should be replicated in Garda Síochána. Second chapter looked at the Garda Síochána's capacity and capability to deal with public order. There are no Garda members dedicated to full-time public order duties. Every member of the Garda National Public Order Unit performs a role within a district and will be extracted, sometimes in overtime, for public order purposes. Members outside Dublin can be deployed rarely and sometimes will gain no experience between annual training events. Currently, the Garda estimate that they require to train 1,200 members to fulfil public order duties, though this is based on an assessment made several years ago and has not been updated. Police Scotland have similar numbers of trained public order officers. Both they and PSNI have officers who have public order trained and work full-time in support units and are available for public order duties. These officers are approximately 20% of trained public order staff, with the remainder serving in the communities. The numbers trained each year are determined by their STRA, their Street Threat and Risk Assessment, and that number can go up and down as they review the threats existing in their jurisdictions. Dedicated units are multi-skilled and are also used to carry out searches and escort high-risk prisoners. Forming full-time units in the Garda Síochána would extract experienced members from district duties and such a move would need to be balanced against other demands for policing and should be based on the current assessment of risk. We recommend that the Garda Síochána use the evidence base of a current strategic threat and risk assessment to determine its public order operating model, capacity, capability and contingency plans. The responsibility for selecting candidates for public order training lies with district officers. The existing criteria is not linked to competencies. We found there was no process to quality assure selection and that inconsistent approaches were adopted. Garda Síochána has no process to monitor gender breakdown or to identify factors that could discourage female representation in public order. Female representation during inspections was found by us to be low, between 5 and 8%. Now that was similar to what we found in other jurisdictions, but there were positive action plans to understand that and to address the issue. We recommend a standardised, transparent selection process for public order duties and a specific strategy to develop greater female representation, including visible female role models in public order command roles. Formal public order command training last took place in 2015, and there's an urgent need to develop a cadre of trained commanders in Garda Síochána. Those who are trained have not been recertified. Briefing days were conducted in February and March 2018, but these were voluntary. Public order commanders should demonstrate professional knowledge, a current understanding of human rights issues, and operational competence through practical experience and formal assessment. We recommend the introduction of a recertification process for public order commanders. The third section was operational delivery. It was clear from this inspection that the greatest risk as regards public order for the Garda Síochána as an organisation arises not from the potential for widespread public disorder, which is considered to be relatively low in Ireland, but rather from inconsistent governance and application of Garda public order policy, which can create a significant risk to public confidence. We believe there needs to be an enhanced mechanisms surrounding the deployment of the National Public Order Unit to ensure the deployment is necessary, proportionate and consistent. In other jurisdictions, police have ready access to human rights advisors who can help operational commanders balance competing human rights during the planning and operational phases of an event. Currently, the Garda Síochána do not have the capacity for this facility. However, plans for extended human rights section within Garda Síochána are a very positive step towards ensuring that human rights is at the centre of all policing operations. We recommend that planners and commanders have access to human rights in public order events, human rights advice in public order events. Whilst we did find some examples of community engagement in relation to planning of a public order event, in general, however, the process is ad hoc and does not form part of an event plan. By contrast, in other jurisdictions, community impact assessments and engagement plans are used to inform the policing operation and tailor the style to meet the needs of the community. Field negotiators are used to engage with event organisers and protesters on the day and inform them what the policing intention is. We recommend that the Garda Síochána should adopt a more structured approach to engagement in public order policing. Policing response to any potential public order situation should be graduated before specialist public order tactics are deployed. To facilitate peaceful protest, normal policing arrangements such as effective engagement, peaceful crowd management or barriers should be considered before the more coercive tactics such as public order are used. In operations I reviewed, we found that specially trained police tactical advisors provided excellent assistance in this regard. However, they were not always asked for, and ultimately we believe the final decision should rest at a senior level. We recommend that all planned deployments of the National Public Order Unit have the prior approval of the Assistant Commissioner with lead responsibility for public order. The final chapter we looked at was post-incident management. The Inspectorate was told that many events are not debriefed in line with policy. Capturing the important lessons from an operation is dependent on local trainers being present and communicating them to the college. Structured debriefing should involve staff from wider Garda departments such as corporate communication and human rights sections. International practice is to involve all agencies involved as well as members from the local community and the event organisers. Lessons learned should influence subsequent selection, training and development of tactics and strategy. We recommend that the Garda Síochána formalise this debriefing process by involving external stakeholders and wider representation from internal units. Public order policing has the potential to be extremely stressful and dangerous and needs to be underpinned by the effective support systems. Welfare support in Garda Síochána is provided by the Employee Assistance Service. On our inspection, they were well regarded by the people we spoke to. We did, however, find that the Employee Assistance Service is not considered as part of the planning for a public order event, but rather can be called in after an incident occurs. In other areas of policing, and particularly in a crime operation, we observed where the Employee Assistance Service was brought in advance and used at the briefing stage to provide resilience to those members who are going to take part in a particularly onerous investigation. We believe this was good practice, and we recommend that this should be the standard in public order policing. In conclusion, Chair, we found several areas of good practice. Coordination of training across Garda Síochána to ensure consistency and standards. The use of specially trained tactical advisors to ensure the minimum use of force. Multi-agency working. However, we believe there are a number of organisational risks unresolved with these current practices. We have identified 19 recommendations that improve the effectiveness of public order policing, develop a greater focus on human rights, the code of ethics, and reduce these risks. Key amongst these will be developing a strategic threat and risk assessment in order that the public order training, capacity, capability, the operating model are all based on evidence. Enhancing governance in order that there's greater consistency in practice and that organisational learning can be used to improve the service. And finally, a senior authorisation process to ensure that the National Public Order Unit is only deployed in a graduated manner, that engagement, tactical advice and human rights have been fully considered, and that the deployment is necessary and proportionate.
Thank you, Hugh. This presentation has taken you through the key findings from the inspection and highlighted some of our recommendations. I am convinced that the implementation of the recommendations in this report will ensure that the Garda Síochána is better prepared to meet its public order obligation. Thank you for listening to our presentation, and we are more than happy to clarify any of the points that we've raised.
Thank you very much, Hugh and Mark. That was very helpful. I'm very conscious that our meeting is with the Commissioner, so we do have one or two points of clarification maybe that you might help us with. I'm thinking more of the audience, because clearly the authority members have had an opportunity to consider this report earlier today. One of your slides had use of force data. I think it's just important to emphasise from the audience that's not Garda data, and that's the core of your recommendation, if I'm understanding correctly.
That's correct, Chair. The Garda Síochána do not currently publish use of force data. We believe this is important transparency, and the slide we used was from another police service to demonstrate how they do publish that on.
And the second question from me, and again for the benefit of our audience, you put huge emphasis in your presentation on the risk associated with, a significant risk associated with the absence of a strategic threat and risk assessment. Could you give us an idea of what you'd expect to see if there was one there in the morning? What it might look like, what it might contain?
Thank you, Chair. And yes, you're right. We have placed significant emphasis on this throughout the report. We see the strategic threat and risk assessment as a building block for the business of public order policing. We would expect to see, and when we looked at various of these documents across different jurisdictions, the first thing we'd expect to see is a detailed understanding of demand. What does public order policing demand place on the local service? So how many incidents were there since it was last reviewed? How many times was the public order unit deployed? So an understanding, first of all, of how many times public order, serious public order, or the need for public order resources were used. Second thing we'll be looking at is an assessment of risk within the jurisdiction. This can be based on community tensions. It would be based on intelligence. It would identify emerging issues such as political issue or a community issue that has arose across the state and starting to raise tensions. And it would provide an assessment of what is that risk in terms of potential for public order. The third section would be organisational readiness. And this is really where the police service looks and says, where are we now? How many staff have we trained? Where are those staff? What equipment have they got? What support have they got? What does the commanders look like? What does our vehicles look like? How have we got everything in place, and where is it to see that it meets the risk and the demand that currently exists? And that's a very thorough piece of work in the ones we looked at. And the last section relates to gaps. Have we a gap in our equipment because tactics have changed, because the risk has changed? Have we a gap in the number of people who are trained in public order, or their distribution? Do we need to have people in different places? Have we a gap in the number of people who are trained for command? And it assesses all those. And then the last section, of course, is an action plan to mitigate those gaps. They are working documents. They are not dusty plans sitting on the shelves. The ones we examined were reviewed every 3 months, dated every 3 months with new information, and are formally reviewed by the executive team at least once a year. And they drove the whole business of public order policing.
Thank you. Colleagues? Commissioner, do you want to clarify anything before we... I'll invite you to speak in a second, but just because Mark and Hugh will be withdrawing, is there any clarification you want to raise with them?
No, as you know, we received the report. We've accepted the vast majority of recommendations, and we just have a point of slight difference around the command structure at AC level in terms of the recommendations. But other than that, we can see how we can quickly move forward to this report. I have to say that the vast majority of our personnel do very well in terms of dealing with large-scale public events and public order events, and the matters that the Inspectorate have flagged up to us are organisational and governance issues that we can quickly get ourselves geared up to deal with and move forward, and that's what we intend to do. So I think it's a very sound document. It gives us a good platform to move forward in this area, and as has been already highlighted and is mentioned in the report itself, you know, this isn't the most pressing problem, so best we just get it right, and we know then that that's well done, and then we can concentrate on all the other very many pressing areas that we also have. So we are anxious just to get this area resolved and to the satisfaction of the policing authority and ourselves, and to move forward then.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. So Mark and Hugh, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And
Thank
we
you for your
can
time.
have another conversation anon. Thanks very much for accommodating us today. So while we're rearranging the furniture, can I just acknowledge, Commissioner, as we did in our publication document, that we fully understand and absolutely recognise that there are a very large number of public order issues that are handled entirely without incident every year by the Garda Commissioner, very big events, and we're absolutely, we're very alive to that. Our concerns were driven in some respects by the difference between spontaneous and planned. Planned ones appear to have been handled without incident, but the spontaneity of some of the incidents that we looked at did certainly seem to cause some issues. So that was driving our concern from the outset, rather than a concern, if you like, that there are not a large number of potentially risky situations handled very effectively and without incident every year. So we absolutely note and accept that. So the conversation, we're now going to move on to a conversation with you about the report. We're going to be, Judith is going to lead our questioning. Do you want to say anything further before Judith begins?
As I've already mentioned, AC Shane has taken over responsibility for this area on behalf of the organisation, and in effect then is the policy lead, and himself and Tony to my left here, Tony O'Donnell, will be leading on the implementation of this. As I've said already, the report is a firm foundation for us to move forward and incorporates a lot of our own learning from Ancasan and also North Frederick Street, and but also then it puts us in a good place, and we're very aware that we have a European capital city, and so we're a national policing service as well, and we must be in a position to respond to protest type events, but also spontaneous incidents. In terms of the strategic threat risk assessment, we do agree very much with the methodology of that, and that has been worked through. I understand to see the first edition of that in the next few days, and that's to be considered at our senior leadership team then next week. So we are moving ahead with this, and I do think we're in a good position to implement this. The risk that has been identified by the Inspectorate, I think we can quickly resolve that risk. If risk is a product of impact and likelihood, then I think we can quickly move on the likelihood of something going awry in terms of our policy planning, preparation and training, etc. So all of that, I want to be positive about the report that we received, because we have accepted it in a positive manner, and as I've said, I think it's a good piece of work, and we just will get on now with the implementation of that. If I might hand over to Dave, if there's any other comments you wish to make, Dave.
I suppose, Chair, what we've done since we became aware of it, that I've actually sat down and met with you in respect of the Inspectorate with a view to seeing how we progress the matter. We have developed an implementation plan that we're actually working with. There's only one piece of it to be put together. But what we've done in respect of that, we've taken on Cosson, which had 44 recommendations. North Frederick Street, the review of that had 10 recommendations. My own Garda Professional Standards Unit conducted a review as well, and there was 7 recommendations in that. And the Garda Inspector's report has 19 recommendations. So we've actually distilled all those recommendations into an implementation plan, rather than try and get caught up as are all of them covered. We've actually distilled them all into one implementation plan, and we have timelines in respect of that. So by the end of this year, I would say nearly 90% of the recommendations or the implementation plan will actually be implemented in full. And there's another couple of pieces then to be done in Q1 of 2020. And that's really around recertification and areas around that where because we had so few commanders up to now, we had initially had 2, we now have 13. So that gives us a bit of breathing space insofar as that they don't have to be recertified until another 2 years' time, or at a time we haven't actually defined yet. So we're looking at that in respect of that. Basically then, as arising from it, and I think that the key thing for us all in respect of it is what's the tangible products that's going to come out of the of the review of what we have done. And quite clearly, and I think the inspectors called it out to us in respect to that, is the strategic response to it. And the strata we were talking about is a new public order strata on Garda Síochána, so that we know exactly what it is our demand, what it is we're required to do. We'll also be able to have new guidelines in respect of the implementation of that strategic assessment, both to determine the public order processes, the capacity, the capability, and also contingencies surrounding around that. We will also end up with a revised public order incident model. Our last one was our HQ directive of 75/17, and that will have to be overhauled in respect of it. And in that, I'd like to say as well that in the context of the Principle 1, I suppose, in the future policing and also the Code of Ethics, we will have to, recently we developed through the Human Rights section in Garda Headquarters, we developed up a framework model that we can actually assess what we have. And we have actually discussed it with them, and we're going to use that tool and that framework with a view to reviewing public order nearly first, to make sure that it's not only HR or human rights compliant, but also that it is compliant with our Code of Ethics. That will also then, what we will be looking at is a new enforcement for civil court orders policy. We've had meetings with key stakeholders in respect of that, both in government and outside of government. A lot of work has been done in respect of that, and now it's about putting that into a proper policy document for ourselves. The new major event and policy and planning policy, that's currently under my remit in headquarters at any event, and that work is near complete and should certainly be available to us in a very short period of time. The two things then that I suppose that what we really want to get into then is the pre-event public order planning checklist, so that we can get out to our people to exactly what we want them to do and make sure that they are compliant with everything that's already recommended in the report here. And also then what we're trying to do then as well is that until we get it online, what we're trying to do is to have a pre-event public order planning template, so that the members on the ground can actually utilise it and get out and communicate that with them, with a view to again making sure that we're compliant with the new arrangements. Again, at a national level then what we're trying to do is to have a proper risk assessment matrix, so that we can actually use that matrix then to determine, again, back to our capability and our responses in respect of it. And included that then as well, or in addition to that as well, was in a new critical incident command model policy. So that really is for command and control rooms, so that those people in there are upskilled to be able to identify those problems at an early stage and be able to get the message out to the underground, so that we know exactly what the proportion of response we're going to have, and make sure that we put the right people in the right places.
Dave, can I interrupt you if you don't mind?
Can.
There's a lot there to take in. Will you share the implementation plan with us?
Yeah, most certainly, yeah.
And then we can have a more informed engagement around that as the year goes on. That would be really helpful.
Well, if I can share one of the issues that
Sure.
you did raise, which was the next point here, was the revised use of force data recording mechanisms.
Yes.
And we have
That's on my list.
we have looked at that, and what we're hoping to get a fix in Pulse in Q3 of this year. And then once we have that fix in Pulse, then we will look at what it is we can, and that will include an automatic emailing to the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission, so that as events occur, it will go directly to them, and get rid of this lag between an incident occurring and it being reported to GSOC.
Okay.
So, and then at that stage, then by Q1 of 2020, we should be in a position to have be able to report something like what you saw on the presentation here as we go along.
Great. Okay, thank you. And the recommendation clearly foresees the authority having an oversight role in relation to that. So we had planned in any event to have conversation with both yourselves and GSOC to see how to take that forward in a way that was meaningful. So your commitment in relation to the Pulse fix is a great first step in that, and we'll be talking to you about then how to give life to that recommendation in a way that enables us all to do what's envisaged. If it's okay, I'll invite Judith to ask some questions about it. Judith?
Thanks, Chair. And Commissioner, I'm obviously very conscious of your experience, professional experience in this area in a different jurisdiction. But I'm interested in your comments about accepting almost all of the recommendations, and the one recommendation that you perhaps slightly disagree with is the one around governance and a single assistant commissioner. Could you just explain what it is about that you disagree with, and what your plan is to make governance more clear?
Well, I think one of the issues was the actual deployment. Who made decisions against one template? And obviously, I think the Inspectorate envisaged that that would lie with one AC, where in the centre and headquarters, whereas I think that is properly lies with the regional AC going forward, who will have an understanding of the local area and be in direct contact with their divisional officer, the chief superintendent, and indeed the superintendents. And I just think within the framework that we set around the corporate policy that we put in respect of deployment, then the regional ACs should be of sufficient, are in the correct place, or certainly of sufficient authority, but in the correct place to make the most informed decision given the local characteristics. And I think it's appropriate that the policy, etc., lies in the centre, but the operational responsibility does lie with the regional AC. And rather than this maybe entering in confusion as to crossover between policy and operational responsibilities, I would like just clarity that the centre is driving policy. Operational decisions stick with operational commanders within a corporate framework.
So will that be clarified then in your policy around this? The governance in terms of decisions to deploy public order units will rest with the regional AC, but the...
So it would fall from the public order incident command, and so the initial decision, when one looks at the circumstances, and this is for pre-deployment, pre-planned operations, should I say, does the threat and risk analysis suggest that we're going to need members in public order equipment? And if so, then it'd be for a regional AC to make that call, but also then to consider within that, as we go around our decision-making model, what else can be done. And certainly the Inspectorate's report talks about escalation and, in effect, moving from members in ordinary uniform to a public order type response, and de-escalation as well, and the restoration of normal policing. So just my sense of it is that, in effect, the headquarters is too remote, and I wanted that at a more local level.
You mentioned the implementation plan, and thanks for your undertaking to share that with us. That would be very helpful. And there have been a number of recommendations identified in previous internal reviews that you referred to, both of you referred to, An Cosan and North Frederick Street. So what's different about the response this time around, and how will you make sure that that implementation plan actually lands, that it's not just a very nice plan that actually doesn't make a difference in the ground? Because there are key risks in this for the organisation, not least risks around community confidence and disproportionate use of force, inconsistency, etc. So how will you make sure that this implementation plan actually lands on the ground and makes a difference at the front end of the business?
Well, I think the difference here is this report has stood back. So Ancasan and North Frederick Street, they're very specific type of incidents, and whereas there was learning from them, that wasn't extrapolated perhaps out into a more strategic sense or an overview from headquarters. So the difference in this is that this comes from the policy strategic overview of this, and then from that then we get to issues around deployment, training, our approach to use of force, and then post-incident management, but also welfare issues. So this picks up, I think, a wider gambit. In writing this report, the Inspectorate have had access to the 2 previous reports, and I think this, in effect, sort of bookends what has happened before. If we move forward with this, in effect, would be taking up the broad implementation, and like I count up between all those reports with 90-odd recommendations. So this is just a sweep up of all of those. But I think having one AC driving this, putting in place the corporate framework, that corporate framework then also reporting on the use of force and the oversight that you'll want to see in terms of the strategic threat risk analysis. Those are all things which will change the approach to this. And we just want to get to a position where our corporate position is strong, because I think our response to the actual incidents is good, and we just want to get a position where our corporate response backs that up.
So you mentioned collating data on the use of force, and obviously the issues around Pulse regarding that. Is anyone at the moment looking internally at the use of force and any patterns that might be emerging from specific geographical areas or units? I mean, does the organisation have a curiosity around that even now, before this recommendation came from the Inspectorate report?
Yes, we have, Julie, we have had a look at it, but unfortunately the data in the way in which it's captured on the Pulse system doesn't lend itself to proper analysis of it in respect to find out exactly what you're talking about. And I am acutely aware of the areas that you're talking about in respect to that, to see is there any high areas where we'd say, for argument's sake, the taser is used, or high areas where incapacitating spray is being used. We have identified some areas, but the manner of recording, because it's so as a manual system, it doesn't really lend itself to that, and we really have worked hard in trying to get this online system in place so that we will be able to produce the data that you're talking about here, and it will certainly be a lot more transparent and user friendly to use as well, in the context of being able to identify what are the key areas that we need to look after.
And obviously we would have a very close interest in that once the system is up and running, because the Inspectorate report foresees a role for the authority formally monitoring that. But I was just curious to know, even now, is there any even informal systems within the organisation to gather data on that? Are superintendents and districts and divisions interested in this?
I think it actually links into the next presentation that the Commissioner is going to do in respect to anti-corruption, and I think there's a number of flagship policies and procedures that we need to look after to ensure all of this, because I think that there's a direct, or maybe a direct link between what we're talking about here and the whole idea of anti-corruption and that whole area in respect to that.
Well, no doubt we'll come back to that.
Yeah, we will, and I will certainly look at that in the context to see, but at the moment it's very informal as opposed to any kind of a formal process internally at the moment.
Commissioner, you mentioned the decision model. Could you just update us on progress on embedding that across the organisation? Because we've seen a number of different versions and heard that training is being rolled out, but can you just update us on where you are in that?
Dave, I looked at Dave there again, because yes, it does come backwards and forwards into corporate governance, but just what's the update Dave position?
The decision making?
Yes, and the decision making
model. The decision making model actually it's almost ready to print. We don't have the license for the design of it, and we've to sort out that piece of work in respect of it. But it's ready to go in respect to that, and it won't. There will be no more changes to it in respect to that, because it takes human rights and the code of ethics at the centre of everything we're doing now going forward. So that is going to be a huge win for us, in my view, in the context of not only for public order, but for everything else we do in the context of decision making. So that will be ready before. I'd be surprised if it's not ready by the end of this month, or not end of July, really, to be and available then. And then we have to go out and do a communication piece to the organisation in respect of it.
So has training on the decision model started, or is it still?
No, because
it hasn't started yet.
We haven't had the decision training on the decision-making model has started, but it's the older version.
Oh, okay.
It's the newer version that we want to get out, because the newer version at its centre has human rights and the code of ethics, and those are the two pieces that we really need to incorporate. Before they were either around it or there were spikes out of it. So that's the slight difference that we have to take on board in respect of it. But it has been started, but it was on the older version of the model.
The Inspectorate report then referred to diversity in public order teams and at public order command level, and I'm not just thinking about gender diversity but wider diversity issues as well. So what is the plan around enhancing the diversity in public order units and at command level? Because there's lots of international evidence that when teams are more diverse you make better decisions. So what is the plan around increasing diversity?
Well, that recommendation is entirely accepted, and really we're going to have to introduce a human resource piece in terms of advertising these positions and moving forward. And the good thing about our 1,200 who are trained at the moment is that is a group that we can quickly churn through. It's not as if they're in those positions permanently, so I'd hope that we can introduce a new system, a new method of applying for this, and then apply that and move on then the diversity, particularly in respect of gender of our public order police, and that's accepted. We had a process where people in fact were selected or plucked out for this particular function, whereas it would have been far healthier if they could have applied, and that's where we want to move to.
And in terms of fairness of the selection processes and consistency across the piece, how would you deal with that?
Well, that'll be for our human resource department to then devise the competition for this. And as much as it's sought after, I think the experience that the Inspectorate had in Scotland was that it was difficult to get female members to join up the public order, so we're going to have to go out with a specific drive or advertisement function internally to attract so that female members are attracted to this to apply in the first place. So even before we get to the process, there's a bit of a sale that we're going to have to do this on this within the organisation.
And are you aware of anything within the fitness requirement that may be disproportionately impacting on female members applying?
I'm not sure.
We actually have discussed that issue. There's nothing in writing in the context of it. But what we really do need to do, rather than alter or change the standard which for the fitness, is to encourage and encourage more females to participate. So in other words, have trial runs and let them go in and see what it's like before they actually go in and be subsumed by having to do it all in the one day. So we have a number of ideas in our heads in respect of trying to get more people involved in it. And I'd be surprised by October that we don't have more people, we don't have more females involved in from that perspective, both at a command level and also at a lower level. But we are going to have to work hard to try and encourage these people to come forward and be involved.
Well, I'm sure the authority will maintain an interest in that area as well. One of the key issues that has come out of the Inspectorate report is the centrality of human rights in public order policing and the likelihood of human rights being engaged at many levels, and the impact on community confidence when the response is disproportionate to public order issues. So embedding human rights and ethics within the policy and practice across public order is a challenge in any jurisdiction, but I suppose we were somewhat surprised that it hadn't found voice in many of the policies, even though you've had a code of ethics for some time now, and human rights is clearly embedded. So can you just give me some assurance around your plans to embed human rights and ethics in the policy and practice across the public order piece?
So this covered, I think, in terms of the recommendations 7, 8 and 9 in terms of selection and training, leadership and command, and the training that we're going to put in place, particularly we have a recertification process for all public order commanders, but also then the retraining then of individuals as a refresh. So as part of the implementation as a policing service for the future, we are doing an uplift of our human rights capacity within the organisation that lies within our our legal department, and really they will be visiting all of our training and all of our policies and examining those against human rights standards and the application of those, particularly in a policing context. Now, we're going to triage those and those areas where it is clear that we may have recourse to coercive powers are areas which will be visited first. So, as part of their ongoing work to examine both training and the policies which underpin that, and I can give you assurance that public order is well placed within that. There are other areas as well. Obviously, where it will require examination, use of firearms, etc. But public order, use of force generally are very topical, very important areas, and they will get attention then from
So you're
human rights
prioritising
experts.
those areas that use coercive or intrusive?
Yeah.
If I may, Chair, as well, in respect of that, at the visit of President Trump, for the first time ever, we had a human rights advisor at the event, at the major event, and they worked through with the public order unit from start to finish. So that was a major sea change in respect of from a human rights perspective. Now, there was nothing really arose out of that event, so we can't really say whether it was a positive or negative, but certainly at least it was a change in direction to show that we are committed to embedding the human rights element of it.
I have one final question, if I may, Chair, and it's on the debriefing and learning. And you mentioned, as I said, Ann Kusan and North Frederick Street, and there was organisational learning came out of those. But how will you make sure that the learning is implemented swiftly on foot of operations and professionalise that debriefing process to garner the maximum learning out of it?
Well, I'd be looking to Dave and his group in an order of delivery of that. So they will have a quarterly meeting cycle in which they'll have to revisit the STRA. The STRA will have to incorporate recent learning and best practice from other jurisdictions as well. So that'll be the governance route, and that obviously will have a function in terms of reporting into corporate governance and us making sure that any recommendations that are given to the organisation in whatever form, either internal or external, are actioned in this respect. So hitherto there wasn't this close sort of governance of this area, but that's been asked for in the inspection, and we are introducing that.
Thank you, Chair. Picking up immediately from the last point that Judith made, one of the issues that was a source of concern to the authority after the North Frederick Street event was that a number of behaviours which had been the subject of critical comment in Assistant Commissioner O'Brien's report on the incident at Uncusson replicated themselves in what happened in North Frederick Street. One aspect in terms of the leadership of the public order serial that was deployed, and both before and at, and secondly, circumstances where an individual member takes an initiative that was not part of any plan and that it was felt to dilute the potential of the unit or the serial to function as a coherent entity. And given that the Uncusson event had been so recently in discussion within the organisation, that it had been discussed with such seriousness at so many levels, it was a source of concern that those practices were replicated in North Frederick Street, and it just adds emphasis to the point of the learning, the application of the learning throughout the organisation. And I just wonder whether either of you has any comment in relation to that.
I think that's and Superintendent O'Donnell is here. He can add if he wishes in respect to the matter. But certainly, what we're looking at in the context of from a governance point of view is the whole from the post and pre and post. Is that the pre-event that we know that the advices have been sought both in verbally and writing, and then post-event then is the debrief, which is going to be hugely important. And from a governance point of view, we have to make sure that those are absolutely nailed down, so that we will take learning from every event, not just from one particular one going forward.
Thank you. I'll come back to another aspect of the North Frederick Street just as my last question. Yesterday we got a copy of the Professional Services Unit report that had been produced in April this year, arising from the Uncosson event, but not about the Uncosson event. It was about policies and procedures that relate to conduct of a criminal trial. Now, it made many interesting points, even on a quick first reading of it. Among them being that the policies and procedures are in many respects entirely impenetrable, and that one needs a degree of second sight to be able to identify what exactly the policy or the procedure is, or whether any amendment has been made, or what the most up-to-date version of it is. And I wonder how quickly an issue like that can be remedied so that everybody who's involved can have a genuine and complete understanding of what the policy and procedure requires. The other interesting point that it made, or significant point that it made, was that the Garda Síochána risk register does not include any reference to the risk of failure in the conduct of a criminal court case. It seems to approach it from the perspective of reputational risk, but there's also the risk that justice won't be done if the conduct of a case isn't as effective as it might be, either in the gathering of or in the presentation of evidence. And the patient reader will understand why there's no reference to the details. One of them is the giving of evidence. Now, and I hope this will be the last time that you will find it necessary to hear me asking a question about that third term of reference from the original report that Barry O'Brien did. But it raises the question, since it was a term of reference, something that the Garda Síochána wanted to look at, that is the conduct of the trial. And given that the Professional Services Unit didn't look at that in this review, has any senior officer at Assistant Commissioner or Chief Superintendent level, Division Officer level, reviewed the conduct of the gathering and presentation, the tendering of evidence in the court case since the O'Brien report was published? If not, is there a reason why that hasn't happened? And if it is, if such a review was undertaken, did it give you satisfaction that you can be confident that the way in which evidence is gathered and tendered in future will be as robust as it possibly can be? And has there been any action taken or in terms of ensuring that lessons are learned from the particular experiences of the collapse of that court case?
So I've seen the GPSU report for the first time this week myself, and I was a tad surprised it didn't answer that last question. That's what I was expecting. So, John or Dave, do you know of any other? No, John.
Was it done in specifically? Is there a specific piece of work done in relation to answering your question? No, it's probably the answer to that. Is a direct answer to that. I think the Commissioner has touched on what Professional Standards Unit have done in a general area around this, as opposed to specifically addressing the issue that you asked.
Well, there is learning points from the GPSU report, and even it's, in some ways it's just stating what is obvious. Like the code gets outdated, and yet people refer back to a document now, which is it's over 10 years old. It's nearly, I think it's 14 years old. And so you don't need to know everything. You need to know where to find it, and I think that's the problem. It's difficult for people actually to find just exactly what are the procedures that should apply. So that's something we do have to resolve, and it's cropping up in other areas as well. So, what is the position of Garda Síochána as of today in respect to different matters? And this will get, greater emphasis and momentum whenever we start to apply, in effect, the human rights writing tool, because a lot of this stuff's going to have to be rewritten against a human rights template and through that lens. And so, in effect, the code may become a thing now just of historic interest, and we're going to have to move to a far more sort of almost a database of advice and guidance, as opposed to two books.
I think you're right, and in that sense, the GPSU report highlights an important point, but that it's still a source of confusion to me, certainly, or I find it difficult to understand how something that was a term of reference in the review that the Garda Síochána set up arising from Untitled has not been dealt with in any way. And when we talked about this several months ago now, this was going to be taken away and looked at because there is a considerable body of information. One of the original barriers was the unavailability of, or the complexity in having access to transcripts of the trial. Transcripts are available on the web. But that there was other information and notes and whatever available to Gardaí. And it's just interesting that in the case of this very significant trial, which collapsed, that nobody at a senior level has reviewed the gathering and the presentation of the evidence in this collapsed trial. And I'm not sure that there is any much point, Chair, in raising the question at any subsequent meeting, but it really would be encouraging if there was a clear indication that the Garda Síochána actually would look at that issue, since it clearly was an issue that the Garda Síochána itself felt it should include in the terms of reference for the Assistant Commissioner O'Brien report. The final point I wanted to make, or question I wanted to ask, was I should have said at the beginning that there are significantly reassuring things in the Inspectorate's report. That there's sufficient number of people trained, that there has been significant progress made over the last 24 months in relation to handling this issue. And certainly from our perspective, the two reviews that were undertaken into the two particular events were open and strong and frank and not uncritical for internal reports, which is good. There was an issue, it seemed to me, certainly in relation to the North Frederick Street, that the sense of what the Garda Síochána couldn't do prevailed sometimes over what the Garda Síochána actually could do, and that the organisation found itself in circumstances where it was placed in a position where it was trying to maintain the peace in circumstances at a time and under conditions which were determined by a private agent separate from it. And I just wonder whether there has been a clear policy outcome from that in relation to how any such future events would take place. And I'm reassured by the fact that the Inspectorate report gives it as an instance of good practice, something that happened at the end of the same month in September last year.
Well, there have been other repossessions since, and in that very division, and a different approach has been adopted where Garda Síochána and our members have taken a far more proactive and firmer response as to when this will happen, and so that it happens at the time to minimise any threat of a breach of the peace, and to make sure that the risk of any incidents whatsoever is minimised. So that has since happened. North Frederick Street at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the evening was an entirely wrong time. That lesson has been learnt, and we are clear with those who wish to repossess property that if what our responsibilities are, and particularly our responsibilities to prevent crime and prevent a breach of peace.
If I may add to that, Chair, is that on Garda Commissioner we're party to a working group on the regulations and licensing of security personnel assisting personnel in enforcing court orders by the Private Security Authority. And that report was completed in March 19. And I mentioned that earlier on in my presentation, that what we're actually trying to do now is to devise a policy for ourselves arising from that interaction. It's a very short document, but it's only 15 pages long. So what we now have done is we're trying to put that into a policy document for ourselves, and also for guidance and assistance for our own members as well, which will assist us significantly in dealing with those types of things going forward.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. Thanks. That's encouraging and reassuring. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Dave. I have a couple of questions, but we're very conscious of the time commitment today, because the Commissioner has an important appointment somewhere else later this evening in the House of the Oireachtas. So I'm going to wait till I get your implementation plan, Dave, and then we'll have a chat and I'll ask you a few more questions. And that will be. I want to we're reordering our agenda slightly and taking a very brief question or two on the homicide review.
I wonder, could I just ask one follow-up?
Of course you can. Absolutely.
Sorry for...
I'm going to hand over to you, Paul,
Yeah.
and you might also ask your homicide question. We've had a preliminary discussion in private, so it's not necessary for this to take too much time, because we do want to talk. We want to allow sufficient time to hear about the Commissioner's anti-corruption proposals. So over to you, Paul.
I suppose I just have one question in relation to the public order issue, and very much welcome the response in relation to the human rights concerns around the use of force and trying to feed in human rights concerns into the sort of future planning of operations. And I note what you said, Assistant Commissioner Sheehan, in terms of the presence of a human rights advisor at the recent visit of President Trump. It's natural, I suppose, that when we talk about human rights in the context of public order, that we maybe focus a little bit on the use of force and trying to prevent the use of force. But of course, the other aspect of this that is vitally important is the positive obligation on the guards to uphold to freedom of peaceful assembly and expression. And in fact, that's specifically referred to in the Inspectorate report, and the fact that the current policy is silent on that. And I'm just wondering, stepping back from sort of use of force issue on human rights, to what extent are you ensuring that in the development of the new policies and procedures that the obligation on the guards to uphold those critical rights around freedom of assembly and expression are fully incorporated?
To be honest with you, it has to be central, Paul, in respect of it. Article 11 clearly sets out the guidelines where we have to operate from. We have been proactive in respect of that in meeting with ICCL in respect of this matter, who again produced a report, I presume, in anticipation of this morning. And what we want to do now is look at their response and to see in what way can we incorporate that into our own response going forward, and to take as wide a view as possible. In addition to that as well, where we are moving forward, and again from conversations I had with the Inspectorate around this, is the whole idea of our community engagement, both pre and post that, in respect of identification of people who can peacefully do their protest. And I think that it was very clear, even from my quick review of what the ICCL had to say today, was that they were very positive in respect of how we dealt with planned events, and how the advice we gave some of the people in respect of that, and it was taken on board. What they did say in the end of it, which I'm kind of wondering where it came from in respect to some of the non-events that kind of happen around the cities and all of that, and some sporadic events that's happening. How do these things happen when we can do the other things so good? So we do need to work with our stakeholders in respect of that to make sure that our ability to comply with Article 11 is fully complied with, and allow those other people to do it. Unfortunately, there are going to be occasions where a peaceful protest may be infiltrated by people who don't want to have a peaceful protest, and that's where the whole concept of making a judgment call is going to become very, very important. That's hope that answers your question, but that's certainly it's the fore of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, no, I think that's welcome, and I suppose I echo the Chair's comments that we look forward to seeing the detail of all of that as it's developed by you over the coming weeks.
Okay.
In relation to the homicide review, I mean, we did have, as the Chair has mentioned, some discussions earlier on in the private session, and so I don't think we need to go back over that. I suppose just to stress the fact that in relation to the review, there are two parallel streams, if you like, going on. One is a review of processes and procedures, but in addition, of course, we're also looking at the investigations into quite a lot of individual cases, and I think we've agreed that we're going to have some further dialogue in relation to those before before we receive the sixth and final element of the report.
Okay, yes, that's fine.
Moline, do you want to ask a question or two? And
Yeah.
then we'll move on fairly quickly.
Thanks, Chair. I'm conscious that this particular report addresses the issue of concerns in relation to the classification of a number of incidents and data concerns, and that you looked at 41 particular deaths that were initially identified as having classification issues. Now, you've produced 20 recommendations in the homicide report, and I'm very conscious of the fact that those recommendations span across quite a considerable number of areas within the Gardaí themselves. I'm also conscious of the fact, and I commend you for that, each of these recommendations have been assigned an owner. My concern is in terms of the coordination of those responses, such that they meet the concerns that are reflected so far in the report. Who has responsibility for the coordination? How is that going to happen? How is it going to be reported on? To what extent are you going to provide reassurance to the policing authority and the public that such an issue will not occur?
I will have responsibility for that morning. I currently chair a group which convenes all of the people, all of the policy owners in the various different areas under the crime investigation, under the policy, under training, under IT, under the crime counting rules, and each of those have been assigned specific responsibility. The last meeting was as late as Monday of this week, and we will, in report number 6 to the authority, we will set out a clear timeline on the progress and when we have done, and we will give the authority full sight of the various different stages. I think one thing to stress as well, and probably touches on some of the other issues that we identified earlier on, is equally we will be looking at what does the future look like. So while we've taken the lessons out of it and we're implementing the recommendations and the learning from each of those lessons, well, what are we going to do in the report 6 will hopefully address both of the issues, both of those issues, but specifically the issue that you raise.
We'll be addressing a number of those things and those matters in more detail when I think September, you think in terms of for the 6th report?
Yes, yeah.
The other issue I think which is relevant before passing back to the Chair is your review of these 41 cases took place within a particular time stream. Obviously didn't take into consideration 2018, 2019. To what extent are you confident that the types of issues that occurred in the 41 cases that you looked at, that they didn't continue into last year, this year?
Well, I think you'll see in report number 5 it does refer to a number of cases in 2018 and 2019, so we have included some of those, continue to examine while obviously the specific 41 relates to a period of time, but it does include also cases that in a review that we've identified during the course of 2018 and 2019. I think it does refer, there is a need, and there is going to be will always be an ongoing need to continue to review and assess, and I think basically our Information Services Centre in Castlebar will play a central role, and in data quality control in addition to the investigative and the peer review that we talked about earlier on. So, again, there are issues that we have.
Thanks, John, and I think it'd be appropriate to come back. Thank you.
Okay, that's a date. Thanks, Moling. We're now going to go back to our agenda in the correct order and have a couple of questions in relation to your monthly report, Commissioner.
Okay, yeah.
And Valerie is going to begin. And then there's a couple of other who have asked for space on this one. So over to you, Valerie.
Okay, thanks, Chair. First of all, I think it's really important to acknowledge, first of all, thank you for the report. It was really important, I think, to highlight and acknowledge some of the anecdotal material, I suppose, you've given us in the report about day-to-day policing work. It's important for us to acknowledge Garda staff, who are the people behind all the frontline members, but also Garda members who are working day-to-day on the stuff that doesn't appear necessarily in the media. Back to attention. Because we would be very conscious with yourselves on the work, in particular in relation to community protection, community engagement. And, you know, it struck me looking at the report, themes really emerge. You know, you're working with all generations. You have a project with your children in Stony Batter working with Gardaí to slow down cars, really important on road safety. You had, I hope they don't mind me calling them more mature residents in Rathmines and Terranure on burglary promotion. Great stuff. You had them all ages together in the St. Raphael's School project, where you had the transition year students working with Gardaí. And I think we don't maybe say often enough how much I think we all recognise how important that work is. You had a very good project too in Trim, I note, a multi-agency approach to fighting some fairly complex criminal activity. Yeah. And I think that as well is something that mightn't be appreciated by everybody, how much the state organisations work together in this area. So again, just to commend all the people involved. The working in the community and working with, and you've other examples of working with different and diverse parts of our community. I think time will tell if the recent recruitment programme has served to encourage people to feel more included and to join Garda Síochána. And I think we all commended your campaign already, and time will tell. Hopefully that'll deliver some results in that area. I'd also like to acknowledge that not all the, a lot of the work requires bravery and can be quite dangerous. And you had your annual Memorial Day recently for deceased for members of staff who lost their lives in service, and I think we'd all like to just pay tribute to those people who lost their lives and to their families, and to the Garda family in general on that note. So I think that's just to pay tribute to that. Leading an organisation the size of Garda Síochána can't be easy, and we also note, Commissioner, some moves in terms of cultural change. We always talk about cultural change as if it's some big project, which in some ways it is. But we noted with interest that the agenda and the minutes of the senior leadership team are now being made available throughout the organisation on the portal, which I think everybody would regard as being very healthy. So it'd be interesting to see what feedback you get on that. And of course, I presume at your senior leadership meetings you discuss how much money it takes to run an organisation like yours. So I have a few questions around the finances, if I may.
Yes, absolutely.
We're almost midway through the year, and very often it's towards the end of the year that the budgetary pressures come on. But I suppose as a nation we're very conscious of uncertain times coming towards us. So as if it isn't always important, it is more important than ever that we all live within budgets. So we'd like to get a sense of how you're doing at this part of the year on that. In your report, you state that while some subheads appear to show some savings, I think we understand that this might be due to timing issues and that you still may be facing pressures across your budget. Would you like to maybe comment on that?
Yes, we're running pretty hot and really running up against our budget, and so our financial position, it's not perilous. At the same time, it's not easy either, particularly given just the amount of operational pressures that we've had in recent times, and you can see that in the expenditure for overtime, but also then some of our non-pay costs as well. Are also right up against the limit. So we are still aiming for a break-even position, but it feels pretty tight even at the 6 months and looking forward.
The pay side would be what percentage of the overall budget?
Well, it's well over 90%.
Yeah, I mean, as you'd expect.
Yeah,
so obviously that's under particular pressure because your service is provided by people. and everybody's trying to do more, as much as is humanly possible, I
Yeah.
suppose, to provide an excellent policing service. So, what can you do to maintain, to contain everything within the budget?
Well, we made decisions even at the beginning of this year about what our recruitment profile would be, and part of that was an answer to our the amount of budget we had, and so where there's a concentration this year, as opposed to recruitment of 800 Garda members, we opted to recruit 600 and concentrate on Garda staff, and that was in part in response to the financial position as it opened out for this year, 2019. We're constantly having to revisit the overtime and seeing just what is essential. There's a lot of stresses on our overtime budget at the moment because of the operational pressures that come from particularly these vicious feuds between criminal gangs. And then the proactive work we want to do, trying to interdict. And there's been a lot of success in recent weeks in terms of firearms, drugs, and really disrupting organised crime activity and bringing perpetrators to justice. But also then there's a long tail with the murder investigations as well, and they are resource intensive. But again, we've had some success, and that's good to see in terms of the effort that's been put into those. But we're having to look at all of our other overtime and see just where we're able to cut back and what our profile should be at various events, for instance, and how we service our various requirements around escorting prisoners, attendance at courts, and other areas which it's some custom and practice in it, and see if we can address those custom and practice issues, because we can save money there. We can then apply that money to press and operational issues in terms of community policing, but also major crime investigation.
And in terms of controlling overtime, how far does budgetary ownership go down within the organisation? Would it go down to?
It goes down to a divisional level.
Divisional level.
Yeah, and I think that's really where I would say the buck stops in terms of the accountability regime. The superintendents obviously would take a close interest, but really lies with the chief supers to manage their budget, but also then the regional ACs and Dave here as well in terms of the roads policing budget. All of these are examined almost on a fortnightly.
If it's at divisional level, how do you balance flexibility on the ground and need to act swiftly in the sense of needing resources available with controlling and pre-authorising overtime?
Well, what we've done this year is we've tried to keep some money back to just even out some of the corporate bumps that can happen during the year in terms of stresses and strains which were difficult to anticipate at the start of the year. And so otherwise then I think we have addressed things like the high earners and made sure there's an equitable distribution over time, but also then we wanted to, as I say, address our overall corporate profile around and the profile that we have at events, because that is an area we spend a lot of money on the assumption that we'll be there to support various other sectors, be it the movement of prisoners, be it at courts, and that's it's a big drain. And
are you satisfied that where you've arrangements in for repayment of costs, like say with commercial events or organisations, are you satisfied that the appropriate amounts of money are being recouped? Is there any opportunity there?
Yeah, well, no. In very recent times now, we have pressed the issue around recruitment full cost.
Yeah.
But still, I think we're a very expensive resource. If we are at an event where we're recouping costs, I have to think, is our time well spent there, or would our time be better spent delivering community policing elsewhere?
Okay. You mentioned overtime, and that's obviously a big driver. What about other aspects of pay costs, like allowances and that sort of thing? And are there opportunities to adapt the roster in any way to be more equitable in terms of people's well-being as well as making demands on them?
So the overtime tail is also in the allowances and the travel and sub. I think, one is directly related to the other. And so in dealing with overtime, you also start to eat into your expenditure around allowances, subsistence, etc. So there is a double saving, but also if overtime goes up, you also see it in your other budget head as well. So the two of them are directly connected, and they are difficult to unravel. I think the piece about travel, if we roll out more of our training via the medium of e-learning, then that'll impact on some of that training and subsistence that goes with training. In terms of the roster, we wish to address the roster as part of our ongoing work. I think there's a better roster that works both operationally for me, but also then for the welfare of the members as well. I think everything I say from now on is going to be carefully noted, but yeah.
Obviously there are matters that are.
Well,
that
I should nail the odd colour to the mast.
Yeah.
I think a 6-day, 10-hour working week is too much for that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if you're talking about people's terms and conditions, there's a whole conversation to be had. But I think it's well recognised that good rostering can affect the well-being of people as well. We noted, obviously, you mentioned e-learning, which is obviously a very cost-effective way to go.
Yes.
I think we also all recognise the need for people to gather together sometimes and learn from each other in a physical space. Having said that, we note there's still $500,000 in overtime in Templemore, even though recruitment is lower this year. Can you explain that?
I think some of it relates to outside extracurricular work that's done, so marking exams as one example. And we can get more detail on that if you wish, but I know it would relate to a range of activities that go beyond just that piece itself.
Just the reduction in recruitment, has that enabled, despite the desire to go towards e-learning as well, but has it enabled to catch up in any other areas of training, like the driver training or the other areas that are under pressure?
No, it's certainly, I mean, the Commissioner used the phrase about us running hot in terms of pay. I think we've certainly been running hot in terms of number of training days, so reducing the intake has certainly given us more capacity to do other training courses across a variety of areas, definitely.
Okay.
We also, just quickly there, we used the two for bringing in the 100 reserves. It enabled us to do that because the first quarter we didn't bring in the 200 guards, and that training is ongoing, so that's the type of thing that
that's ongoing at the moment, is it?
Yes.
And when will those reserves be available?
They're due to finish now in about, I think, the next 4 to 5 weeks.
Oh, good. I think we wish them well.
They're training out on the stations then will start.
Okay. My last question, because I know we've lots more to cover, but have you any sense at this stage what the likely budgetary outcome or spend outcome will be this year?
Sorry,
Have you any indication at this stage what the outcome will be in terms of meeting your budget at the end of this year? How much surplus will you have?
Don't know what I'll be returning the surplus there. I think if I squeeze in through a crack in the door, I'll be happy enough. We'll be squeezing in there. We're planning to break even, but there is a lot of pressure in that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Valerie. You made a really important point there, Commissioner, and I just want to underline it. Because sometimes savings in overtime are presented as if you were depriving the community of Garda capacity. You made the point that when savings are applied in one area, they result in the application of funds in another policing priority area. It's not as if the money's gone, and I just think that's a really important point to underline, that savings are as much to do with prioritising policing needs, because sometimes it's not heard that way in the community, and it's important, I think, to underline it. Our colleague Maureen Lynott joined the meeting this morning, and she left a question with me which won't come as any surprise to anybody who's followed Maureen's themes of interest.
She's not from Mayo, isn't she?
She's from Mayo. It has to do with the civilianisation and the redeployment question. It's something that she's been following right through. If I'm correct, according to the police reform programme, you had a target to have something like 250?
Yep, this quarter.
Redeployed by the half year.
It's
240, no, 250
No,
in this quarter.
Well, whatever, but I'm giving you a
sure.
half-year piece.
Okay.
And according to the Commissioner's report, it's at 111 by June 14.
Yep.
Now, on top of that, Maureen did her sums and she pointed out that the rate of redeployments for sergeants and Gardaí is lower than last year, just the rate. May or may not be correct. I'm just passing that on for what it's worth. So I guess our concern is, what's the chances of reaching the mid-year target, and then your sense of the end-year target, which is 500?
So in terms of reaching the target, we've fairly robust auditing processes around ensuring that people have moved out. So the figure showing at 111 reflects that, you know, what we can absolutely stand over and say that 111 have definitively moved out. There are 140 or so we have people assigned into posts, and we're waiting for confirmation of that those individual guards have now moved out, and they've literally landed. The people have been there probably about a week to 2 weeks at this point. So will we make the end of June? We may not exactly hit the end of June, but we won't be too far off the end of June at that point.
Just add on it there, our first quarter target was 75 and we reached that, as you know. Our second quarter is 150, and as Joe said there, we've nearly about 50 of them have been authenticated that they've actually been redeployed. The others, all the civilians are in place for the redeployment. I can assure through the chair on that. We've about 165 at the moment. Actually, we've actually more actual civilians in place there. I'd also, and as Joe said there, so the handover has taken place. Will it be done by the end of this week? I don't know. We're pushing hard for it. We're doing another review today to get up-to-date figures, but it'll happen soon after, if not. In relation then, we've 275 for the final 6 months of the year, and you're probably aware that we did a census there in the first quarter, and that's actually been worked on since, and we'll have up with the Commissioner by the end of this week fourth iteration of a workforce plan, which will be based on the census, and obviously, among other things, what the census will do, it'll very much focus the 275 and the roles that we're going to target for the rest of this year.
Okay, so you're optimistic for mid-half-year figure there or thereabouts in terms of calendar?
They're all in place, but as Joe said, we're in relation to people coming in, we have a validation process which is very thorough, and we don't count somebody until we're absolutely 100%. All these civilian staff are in place, and we're working hard now to get the validation for our people to go back to the front line. I guess I made the same point then as I made about overtime. It's not a good use of resource if you've got two people in the same job, so the redeployment bit is an essential closing of that loop.
Well, I've written to all the relevant divisional officers there today, and they're to respond to me by tomorrow afternoon. And in fairness to them, they respond. So it'll be there or thereabouts. We won't be very far off. And in fact, I would say, by the time we get into July, we'll be exceeding our half-year point. The challenge is just the next suite of jobs and roles that we're going to assign the Garda staff to.
Well, we're looking forward to getting a briefing on the census in a couple of weeks, so we'll watch this with interest. Thank you, Commissioner and Alan. Pat would like to follow up on the Commissioner's report.
Thanks, Chair. So I want to cover the area of culture reform, transformation of culture within the organisation. And I'd like to thank you, Commissioner, for outlining your vision for this in the monthly report. I realise not everybody probably has the monthly report, so I'll just mention there are 7 quick strands to it. So your vision for a culture, which we welcome, we think is very strong, engages, supports and listens to all staff in an open and safe environment, identifies and effectively deploys resources to meet demands, provides strong, visible and ethical leadership, promotes innovation and learning culture, underpinned by honesty, integrity and a respect for diversity, encourages and recognises excellent work and enhanced performance, addresses underperformance and unethical behaviour, and supports the health and wellness of all staff. Now, of course, a key recommendation for the culture audit, which was carried out in May 2018, is that your vision, your cultural vision for the future will be defined. You have now done that. And they said do that after a period of reflection and internal discussions. So we're very, very pleased that you have now put that in writing. We do welcome the link to your vision for the 3-year strategy, keeping people safe, and your statement that a positive organisational culture is a key enabler to achieve your vision for the 3-year strategy. That's very strong. And as I said before, acknowledge your own commitment to achieving cultural change during your term as Commissioner, and I've said here many times that that is a huge challenge, probably one of the most difficult part of your job, but will be a significant legacy, and it will take the full 5 years to achieve it, but I believe it can be achieved in the 5 years. Just a few questions, initial questions on the vision. We might go on then to implementing it. So I suppose the question is, do you think it addresses the issues raised in the culture audit? And I'm talking here, say, the findings in the culture audit. And I suppose there were culture insights: silence means survival, time taken to cover themselves against unfair scrutiny. It's all about who you know. One rule for me, another rule for others. Small is beautiful. And then there were written rules like befriend the right people, don't challenge, keep your head down, and don't let your colleagues down. So, are you happy that you've addressed the findings and these issues in the vision for the fit-for-purpose culture in the organisation?
Well, of itself, it's setting out a vision, but the things that you raise with me require a specific action plan. Tony has drawn up an action plan around employee engagement. And we can share that with you because that document's complete, and that sets out then a whole series of very practical actions that will happen within the organisation, and we want to increase actually the connection between the strategic and the tactical, between the members and those in higher positions of authority within the organisation. And certainly, I'm determined to break down this sense of favouritism or cliques or inner circles. And I'm in nobody's inner circle, and I'm playing all that I see with an entirely straight bat. I believe fervently in the importance of visible and ethical leadership, and I believe fervently in the importance of integrity and honesty in terms of preserving and growing public confidence. So that, I think, is very clear within the organisation, but as I make more decisions and to see the impact of those decisions, it's becoming clear as time goes on. Thank you for reminding me about the cultural vision. We have this done. I wanted to make sure that it also fitted in with the other documents that we've written, principally our strategy statement for 1921. We do have a piece around internal communication of this, and I wanted to be clear that all of our communication was supportive of each other, and also then was supported by organisational actions, particularly around areas like promotion.
Okay. We'll come back to the plan. The reason I asked that question was in your, if you like, introductory paragraph, you talk about this strategy is conscious of the recommendations of the culture audit. And I just wonder, that this is your plan. I'm not saying you must change anything. I think it's very good. But is that strong enough, bearing in mind that 40% of your members completed the survey? They're waiting to, there's a low, I suppose, expectation that anything might happen. So my guess is it's probably, might consider using a stronger word. Like, does it address the findings? I think it does. I think that's just saying it does address the findings of the culture audit rather than just being conscious of the recommendations.
Well, the strategy statement very certainly does address the findings, okay. And the strategy statement, those are written.
Look, I'll leave that to you. It might be worth saying that. And the other point, and this is the last of the specifics of what you've stated. An awful lot of the things I mentioned out there were about keeping your head down and not speaking up. And your very first, if you like, strand of the new strategy for your culture is engage, support, and listen to all staff in an open and safe environment. And it might be worthwhile considering adding something about speaking up, and are encouraged in which you could say, for example, an open and safe environment in which all members are encouraged to speak up, something like that. Which adds to the listening, But overall, I think it's very, very strong. And there are 7 very, very, very strong statements, and I want to thank you for that. Just one last point, maybe, sorry, on the detail. You do refer in some of the cases to all Garda personnel, and in all other cases, all staff, just to have a, so I presume it's for everybody.
Okay, yeah.
Just have a look at the wording on that.
Yes, okay.
Okay, you mentioned the plan to implement all of this, and certainly it was very, very useful for me and for my colleagues to bring this all together into one page, into one document. So the plan you're talking about is more than a communication plan. I presume a key recommendation of the culture audit is the need to develop a clear plan and timelines. In other words, a roadmap for the future planned transformation journey to a fit-for-purpose culture. So is that what you have in mind when you're talking about? I hope it is, because I think that's what we need. We need as well, the actions to support the development of this culture over a number of years. It's only a draft. These things will always change over time. But I think it will be very, very useful for the authority to have this plan and timelines over the next number of years, as far out as you can, but at least 3 years, ideally for your full term. I think that would help us greatly, rather than trying to find the actions in the policing plan. They can still be there, of course, and in the 3-year strategy and in other plans. I think it would be very, very good to have a document where we can look at which our culture hat on, if you like.
Okay. Well, but some of the things from the cultural audit are not things you do for 4 or 5 years. They're things that must change and remain changed. You know, like our selection, promotion processes, etc., must be clearly and demonstrably fair to all individuals who might apply for a position. But we have a plan around employee engagement, and I think if I share that with you, then I'm going to take your feedback on that.
Yeah, just think of it in terms of the ask. Certainly that would be a start. But I think it would be important. It would be also important for you in terms of how you communicate with your members. These are the issues. This is the culture we're going to develop and instill, and this is how we're going to do it. I think it would be very, very useful to bring it all together over as long a period as possible. And because I think we're going to be coming back to these 7 areas on a regular basis. How are you doing? We think they're strong, very, very strong actions. So you have plans for lots of things, including what we already discussed here earlier on at the meeting. So why not have a plan, a strong implementation plan with great detail and timelines for culture. So give us what you have, but we look forward certainly looking at it from a comprehensive point of view. Maybe just moving on, a few quick wins. Maybe I might mention the Code of Ethics here. It is nearly 3 years since that was approved, and that would have been, a quick win in terms of the journey towards a new culture, or a fit-for-purpose culture. And I suppose I noticed there are no stats in the monthly report on this occasion. So I'm just wondering, can you give us some update on where we are on the Code of Ethics, in particular in the signing up and the completion of the training?
If I just look to Alan here, but as a brief member of the last private meeting, following, I think, our last public meeting, I wasn't content about the data, given the number of people I've seen pass out of Templemore, the number of people who've been through promotion processes and other selection processes. So we've done an examination of detail, and percentages have moved considerably. So if Alan just outline where we are at the moment with that.
Following on from that, when the Commissioner instructed us to do that, Superintendent Brian Conway, who you all know, carried out a validation audit, deep audit, contacted all the CPT schools through the Assistant Commissioners and the chiefs, POs, Executive Directors, for returns. And the returns that came back, and there's a bit of a health warning at the moment, and that we're still delving into. We're checking certain things, but it showed about 85% of the organisation, just under it, have been trained, and it showed from the point of view of signing about roughly 80%.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. Now we're checking that again to be sure. But what we will do, Pat, is I know you're the board you chair. I think we're meeting on the 18th, and I've given a commitment to the Commissioner that I will bring the fully validated figures to that for you.
Okay, well, that's certainly a big step in the right direction, because if you don't have a situation where almost everybody, whatever it is, 98%, a very, very high percentage, have signed up to the Code of Ethics, well, you're going to have a real challenge in implementing cultural change, in my opinion. So we look forward to receiving get that in writing, and then obviously to get that completed as quickly as possible. I know what you mentioned by the end of Q4 in 2019. I think that's in the reports in your report.
For the training?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, well, there's an operational imperative about getting that training done, because we've so many other things stacked up behind it in terms of training as well. So we want to forge on, get that finished, and then we've the investigation management system, for instance, that's rolling out, and we have a big training program with that. So we'll want to push on with that, and Alan then can sort of deliver the news and properly validated of where we are with the signing of the Code of Ethics. But I think all told, the figures I've seen are very positive. I just want to be sure of them.
Okay. Another quick win, and we did discuss it in the past, would be the Garda uniform. And I think you told me at one of our recent meetings that is not going to happen as quickly as I first thought. The reason I mentioned it is it was a big part of the culture audit, where it was one of the biggest grievances of your members. They wanted a uniform that was fit for purpose, that would reflect the feeling as professional and looking as professional and representing a dynamic organisation as possible. So I just want to give you any update on the uniform.
Well, as a result of the feedback from the association conferences, in fact, John and I took the process by the scruff, and we decided on the uniform, and that's back to procurement now. So when do you think that might? It's in a procurement. Yeah. It's in a procurement cycle now.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
I think.
Has it been trialled? Has it been trialled?
The uniform now, there was a trial of a uniform.
Okay.
Well, but 4 locations. There was a trial out in Tala and Limerick.
Okay. Do you think it'll go down well?
It has been involved, and it has involved in the lessons learned. Taken.
Do you think it will be well received? Yes.
Well, I think it's certainly for operational members, it's a considerable improvement on the uniform they have at the moment. They'll certainly feel more practical, more able to withstand the weather and some of the extremes we have here in terms of wind and rain, and also in the end, it's a police uniform, and so whenever we selected it, we're selecting from garments which have been well used and well received by other forces, and we're not having to cut new ground here ourselves. It was just in terms of the design and the elements that make it up. So we're content with what we've selected, and we're forging ahead then.
In terms of driving a fit-for-purpose culture, do you have any sense of resistance or acceptance within the organisation? You meet your people all the time, and I'm sure it comes up in conversation. What's your sense of willingness, I suppose, to adopt and to change the culture that you wanted to achieve?
Well, I think actually within it's a very positive organisation to be a part of, with very good people, very committed to what they're doing, and they want to actually be working in an organisation which is seen to be effective in the delivery of a policing service, and efficient and not mired in controversy, and just want to get on with the job and have public support around that. And so whenever I go out and about stations, I always leave them with a very positive sense, just in terms of where the personnel are and their morale and the quality of the people that are in Garda Síochána, both staff and members.
Okay. I'm conscious of your tight time pressure. I'll just maybe a few last things. In the communication, I presume you're going to put it into your annual report, and in what's the monthly newsletter, Garda Beat, is it?
Yeah.
Newsletter. Newsbeat, yeah. Which is an excellent, I think it'd be a great way of communicating the desired culture. I'd recommend you use that method of communication. So I suppose in conclusion, it would be important that progress is measured. So we spoke at the last public meeting about the culture audit. Probably next year would be the appropriate time to measure where culture has moved to. So that would be 2020. And I think very, very important then to see progress, that we'll see a better response. very important that we see the implementation plan and timelines, as I mentioned, and very, very important that the Code of Ethics work is complete. So thank you very much, Commissioner, and I hand back to the Chair.
Thank you, Pat. And Commissioner, can I join with my colleagues in acknowledging the significant increase in the Code of Ethics signing? I think that's important, and it's a really useful segue, I think, into our next agenda item, as indeed has been your conversation with Pat about culture. A couple of months ago, you spoke in public about your intention to have an anti-corruption policy in place in the course of this year, and we invited you to come along today and share your thinking with us and your thoughts as you're developing that policy. So really, this is a slot. This slot is yours. We may have some comments and questions, but this slot is yours. So we'd like to invite you to just to share your thinking, and we know full well that it's a developing piece of work, so we're just anxious to hear your thoughts, and indeed for the community to hear your thoughts, because there was some commentary after your previous remarks that I think might need to be riched up a bit and coloured in a bit to help people understand what exactly you have in mind.
All right, that's grand. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity just to present. I've 4 or 5 slides here to work through with yourselves, so and then I'll leave time for hopefully some questions after that. So this is counter-corruption in the real world as opposed to a TV drama. So why bother? And I think that one of the important things here to emphasise, and I've said this a couple of times already, is that this is about securing and maintaining public confidence. No more important quality for members and staff from Garda Síochána that they are honest and act with integrity. And that is essential to public confidence, and is one of the really very important aspects of any policing service, and should be for Garda Síochána. Not just corruption in a narrow sense, so not just corruption in a dramatic sense, but also things like how we are perceived in terms of the fairness of our actions, our behaviours, and how impartial we're seen to act as well. It's about us as an organisation also being proactive about ensuring that the high standards that we have set are being followed by all of our staff. And I think throughout this there's an element of prevention, deterrence is better than detection, being very clear and giving a very strong organisational signal about the example we want to set, being unambiguous about the responsibility in all members and staff, and then Garda Síochána goes a long way to preventing corrupt behaviours in the first place. And underlining all of this is our own Code of Ethics and human rights ethos that we wish to further develop within Garda Síochána. But it has to be said that the vast majority of our members and staff do on a daily basis live up to the high standards that both I, you and the public expect of them. So the role of an anti-corruption unit, I think one of the important things is just that it provides guidance and advice. Some of this can be terms of policy, but also then practically from lessons learned in areas of conflict of interests. We're a small enough society, we need to be careful that there's not conflict of interest in areas such as procurement or investigations that we would take on, and that's just very basic that people who are engaged with Garda Síochána feel that they're getting a fair crack of the whip. The protection of our data and information, another important area. Again, people trust us with their private and personal detail, indeed some very intimate detail. We must be very active in ensuring that is protected, and again setting a high standard in respect of that. Inappropriate relationships, and that can be with criminal gang, but also inappropriate relationships in terms of pursuing personal relationships with those you might meet in the course of their duties, and particularly where this is a relationship which has an element of vulnerability in terms of the member of the public, and that has to be called out as entirely inappropriate that a Garda member would in effect use their time, their work, their position in work, and the trusted position they are in society to pursue some form of sexual relationship with an individual who may be vulnerable. Other business interests as well, interests that may not be compatible with service either as a member or staff member of An Garda Síochána, and so they can be areas such as any engagement with things like private security, but also other forms of employment which require you to be in a certain place at a certain time, and therefore then not available to me to call upon should the need require. Other areas then which we're very actively considering is with cause or random drug testing. With cause is on the basis of information that we might receive, non-intrusive type drug testing. Random in those areas which we regard as being high risk in terms of, say, the pursuit or the use of high performance vehicles, the possession and carriage of firearms as the course of their duties. Vetting, particularly in those areas of vulnerability where members or staff have access to a lot of important and sensitive information, to make sure that they're not exposed to blackmail or coercion by activities in their private life, either financial or relationship. It should have an intelligence function, which I'll explain a little more in the next slide, and also then good practice in other jurisdictions has illustrated the importance of an anonymous reporting function. So in effect that there's almost a corruption stoppers type line that people can ring in their particular concerns, and an anti-corruption unit can look at those and see is there something there, is there something to follow through, or does this chime with some other piece of information that we might have. Again, this is about creating a culture of deterrence and prevention. People know that we take these matters seriously and we're pursuing through on them. So the anti-corruption unit itself, it should operate in a secure and confidential manner, very obviously. It should receive all intelligence relating to anti-corruption. It should liaise with GSOC and its successor on intelligence and information received, because they too can be in receipt of information about an individual member or concern about members, and it's important then that there's an exchange of information to make sure that the appropriate investigative response is put in place, particularly in respect of more serious matters. Next slide. Complaint reduction strategies. Thank Dave for his hospital pass earlier there. So the liaison with GSOC going forward should be around the information around complaints reduction strategies as well. So we have an understanding of where the hotspots are for complaints, hotspots for use of force, but also hotspots for discontent being expressed by the community in terms of how Garda members or Garda staff are acting with that community. So we would see that as being a pretty proactive piece of work that we want to undertake, and even yesterday's announcement about body-worn video, that's a real game changer around complaints and about contested situations, and that's very welcome too in terms of reducing the amount of complaints made. Anti-corruption should be an important part of our ongoing training. I mentioned student Gardaí and detective training courses, but really that could extend to leadership training as well. This is an essential part of the ongoing awareness and training that everyone within the organisation should receive. And also then the anti-corruption unit will have to develop policies and procedures in the context of best practice and current case laws, and some of these will have to be written really from scratch by the organisation, but there is a lot of good practice from other places to draw upon in respect of those. Lastly then, the last slide is about leadership, and it's not the responsibility of one unit to really counter corruption, but also to create a very positive working environment in the organisation. There's a service-wide responsibility that falls on all supervisors, It falls most heavily on the senior leaders and managers within the organisation, but everybody in the organisation, both staff and members, have a responsibility in terms of countering bad behaviour, poor attitude, and behaviour which leads to corruption throughout the organisation. And the requirement of this is the active intrusive supervision at all levels, so that those who have concerns know that there's a route they can raise those through. So we need to be seen to be active in setting and then explaining, but also then enforcing the standards and why they are important and why they need to be enforced and what's at stake if we don't enforce those. And as I said at the start, deterrence and prevention is seen to be better than detection. If we are seen to be taking this area very seriously, and we are, then it should have an impact then on behaviours within the organisation and indeed on the attitudes of those joining the organisation. We do take this very seriously. Integrity and honesty are absolutely essential for anyone who is either a member or staff member of Garda Síochána.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you for that. I think there's a couple of very interesting points you made there that bear emphasis and repeating, because again, sometimes the public commentary can be a bit blinkered. This focus on integrity building,
yes,
and prevention. I think I love that. I like that phrase, integrity building. It's a very nice way of describing, because people can find themselves in situations where they're uncertain. So your focus as well on providing guidance is very, very welcome. And I also would like to underline the fact that this policy that you're developing and this approach is for everybody who works in the Garda Síochána. Yeah. And again, I think that's a very important point to underline, because I know some parts of the organisation maybe sometimes feel that they're inappropriately impacted by this kind of a discussion. You mentioned intrusive supervision towards the end of your presentation there. Would that include being intrusive about things like lifestyle indicators?
Well, I think if you're going to ask about someone's lifestyle, you need to have a specific reason why that's important. And I would point to areas of our business where individuals have, both members and staff, have pretty unfettered access to secret material and highly sensitive material. And I think that in order to protect them, but also to protect the organisation and protect the information, it's appropriate that we have a vetting process, which at times may seem intrusive, because we have to have an understanding of an individual's life outside Garda Síochána. So what's their financial position, and what's their position in respect of relationships that they may have, which may be inappropriate. And this is all to avoid either a member or member of staff being subject to some form of coercion or intimidation or indeed blackmail.
And so what you have in mind is in-career vetting?
Yes.
Because it has tended to be an entry vetting, if you like, but you're talking about in-career vetting occasionally as people move around the organisation or progress.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure my colleagues have a couple of questions and comments. I want to remind everybody, promise the Commissioner we're finishing at 5. So, Judith.
Thanks very much, Commissioner. And I really welcome the very strong statement that you make through this. And it's not just about the kind of Superintendent H corruption and all of that. It's the fairness, behaviour and impartiality thing that is really important. I have 4, I promise, very, very quick questions. The first is, how are you bringing the representative organisations with you that this is a safeguard rather than a threat? Yeah. The second question is, what do you envisage the reporting lines of this unit to be? The third is, are you looking at subcultures within units and districts and areas, and perhaps tenure to make sure there's fresh flow of personnel in and out as an anti-corruption method? And finally, in your list of integrity building advice, you talk about protection of data and information, but sometimes also it's about disclosing something that you know. So not disclosing could also be an integrity issue. And so Is that something that's on your radar as well?
So we have been in discussion, and certainly I have talked to with the leading officials within the associations about this, and certainly they don't want individuals serving in Garda Síochána who are going to bring the organisation into disrepute. This has been an opportunity to voice this with the policing authority. The next stage, as we start to develop the proposals, but the specific policies as well, will be consultation then with the associations and what those will look like and what they will mean. But I think the associations, as am I, are well aware of a number of incidents of behaviour which they would see, which they also would believe can't be tolerated. So they are supportive, but also they have to think of the welfare of their members, and any processes that we wish to introduce. Obviously, we want to be sure that they're fair and equitable in their application as well. So, in respect of information and protecting information, what I meant there was the specific inappropriate release of information of whatever nature that might be, or data.
But inappropriately hiding information could also be.
Yes, well, I think there's a duty as well to speak up. Too, it's not as explicit as it might be, but that's something that we might look towards in setting this unit up, but also when we set out the preamble for what our new conduct regulations would be as well. So that's something to explore as well, Judith.
The tenure issue?
Oh, tenure. I'm never quite sure of tenure. Tenure can become a bit arbitrary, whereas I think we don't really have a threat assessment in respect of the threats that we actually have in place around integrity and corruption in its widest sense in the organisation. I think we need to get up. We need to start this. We need to get up and running with it, and we need then, in effect, do a survey of the information that we have. We may request information from GSOC so we can actually do a threat assessment for what our risks are, and then once we've done a threat assessment, decide just what the other tactical responses are. And what we've picked up on there is best practice that's been applied in other jurisdictions. It's not to rule it out. I just think it's a bit of an arbitrary tool at times.
But you would consider it. And finally, was the reporting line?
Well, the reporting line is to Dave and then on through then to the deputy.
Anybody else want to ask anything in relation to that? Bob?
Just a very quick question and a point of information, and to echo unambiguously welcome and support you in this work. It really is important. Is there any obligation on people in the Garda Síochána, whether Garda members or Garda staff, to disclose other interests that they may have, perfectly legitimate, constitutionally valid business interest activities outside their work?
Well, yes, the obligation does exist within the Garda Síochána Act, but I would like to be in a position where we are proactive in gathering that information because certainly there's been instances where there is a direct conflict between a second business interest and then your membership of Garda Síochána, and membership of Garda Síochána in terms of the warrant that members carry in particular has to come first.
And just an extension of that question, clearly some of your senior team are covered by the Standards in Public Office annual ethical declaration.
Yeah.
Have you a process in place to review those? Because they already contain declarations, as a person who's filled them in lots of times. And there's a source of material for you to review already.
Yeah, the material is there and available to us, so people have to make a declaration, but as you know, we're in this peculiar situation with SIPO returns where if you believe you have nothing to declare, you don't have to say you have nothing to declare. So it is a slightly strange position to be in. But certainly for those who make declarations, the material is available to the Commissioner for his
But
use.
I suppose I was more interested in whether you have a systematic process. Like these things have an annual date. So you get bundled, somebody somewhere in your organisation, there's a bundle. What's the cut-off level and who's covered by that?
I think it's superintendent.
Assistant principal superintendent.
So it's a reasonable bundle?
Yes. Yeah.
So is there a process to look at the information contained in that bundle and risk assess it already?
The answer to that is it has not been done. But the material is available if we want to look at it in that way. Remember, it's returned in, I suppose, for a particular purpose.
Well, I understand it's returned for
sure,
purpose,
yeah.
but you have it.
No, the material is, I accept that, Josephine, and it is available to the Commissioner for use. And certainly the conversations that I've had with the Commission have encouraged us to look at that. It certainly fits well into this space.
Well, I might make two suggestions to you then, because this is an existing piece.
Yeah.
So that perhaps a first step might be to have a systematic process, perhaps through Dave, through whoever, to protect the Commissioner, to save him having to read them, that there should be a process in place to risk assess them. Secondly, you might consider encouraging nil returns from people who are covered. I understand the Act is awkward. The Act doesn't require them. It's an awkwardness, but plenty of organisations encourage nil returns to be made, even though there's no requirement. And that would give you another bundle.
What we've done in the organisation is we've asked people to confirm that they are compliant. So it's the equivalent of that. So if they haven't made a return, they're asked to confirm that they are in compliance with that piece. So it amounts to the same.
It's the nearest thing, it seems to me, that you already have at your disposal for in-career vetting for certain officers. Modest, but it's there, and it would be a shame to set up a whole new machine without at least incorporating that material that's readily available to you as part of your development of this strategy.
Just related to that, Chair, we do have a gifts and hospitality policy, as you know, and we do have a register in that, and we do keep track on that.
You have a code of conduct as well.
Code of conduct.
Okay. So in terms of next steps, Commissioner, your next step is to, in parallel with the preparation of this policy, which is with Dave, is to engage in consultation with the associations and the civil service unions.
I think, yes, well, Dave's drawn up the implementation plan, and then when we've that done, then start the consultation then.
Okay.
Well, the implementation plan will be a skeleton, really, of what we intend to do, and then we'll have actually something practically on the sheet of paper to talk about.
Well, we really wish you well with it. It's, as I said when I was introducing this item, it's such a logical extension as well of some of our earlier conversations. We congratulate you on the initiative, and we look forward to continuing to monitor the progress in relation to it, because I think it's very important, and it's really important to emphasise that this is for the protection of the 99. That's because sometimes it's perceived the other way around, and I just like to emphasise that. Seeing that I have allowed myself all of about 2 minutes, can I ask Dave one question, going back to the conversation that you had on public order policing? You mentioned the decision model being ready to go, and we'll talk again about that. Is there a plan to connect the decision model and the supervision that will follow from that with your performance management system? Because I'm concerned, the reason I'm asking this question, just so that it doesn't sound completely daft, is a model can sit on the wall. And you talked about having rights in relation to the design, and it can look very pretty, and it can have the words human rights in the middle of it, and the words code of ethics in the middle of it. But unless it's connected to your supervision systems, and then to your performance and learning, and your performance management systems, where does it get you?
Well, to be honest with you, I've used the code or the decision-making model for years, particularly around Section 50 prisoners, around Section 2 bail applications before the High Court or higher courts, and a lot of my senior people would use it in the context of that. I've even used it in the context of just making decisions about whether I should suspend or not suspend a person.
But if you weren't using it, how would anyone know? So that's my question, is how does it connect into the broader management system?
I think I have to say that from coming back again from the UK and being on the SEC, it is a critical factor of everything you do, because it really gives it gives body to what we've been talking about earlier on in respect to anti-corruption, ethical behaviour, and how you're going to behave yourselves. Because really, your decision making really gets down to nuts and bolts of your ethical decision or ethical behaviour as you move along. And from my perspective, I think it's a critical element of it. And I know that I made a point earlier on that the decision-making model, even for the students in Templemore, is currently ongoing, but it's the older version of the model, and now the newer version model will have to come on board. So I really think it's probably one of the key pieces that is going to come out of the whole public order thing in respect to that, and we really do have to go out now and sell that to the organisation in the context of, if you're making a decision, these are the factors you need to consider. And I think what's going to be key for me is that it's easily accessible on the Garda portal and everything else, so that people can go in and look at it when they are making very critical decisions.
And I completely agree with you. It's the accountability loop. So how do you know if somebody is actually using it? Where's your gap analysis? How do you know, other than faith? They've been trained and off they go, but how do you test?
Well, if you take the public order for argument's sake, and one of the parts of the public order will be that you're going to have to go through the decision-making model to come to a decision. So therefore it's going to be documented, so the steps that you take in making that decision will be around the decision-making model, and that is going to feed into both the pre, where you have to do it, and it's going to feed in then to the debrief afterwards. I would see both of those as critical. I mean, you're making a decision beforehand, but you also have to make a decision afterwards. Did I do the right thing, or is there anything I could have learned from doing that, or could I have done something different?
So the documenting is critical.
So the documentation of it in respect to it is critical, yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, everybody. Thank you, Commissioner and colleagues.
Thank you.
And we wish you well this evening.
All right,
in the next part of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're adjourned.